Kubernetes is everywhere, one of the most powerful tools that each DevOps engineer should be familiar with, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to create a Kubernetes cluster using Linode. Linode has some simple and quick solutions for deploying a Kubernetes cluster in a few minutes. So by using Linode, you will have the perfect environment so you can go ahead and try to test deploying different kinds of objects, and it will be a perfect environment for you to go ahead and play with Kubernetes hands-on. So in this video I'm going to assume that you already started learning Kubernetes and you are just looking for a perfect environment so you can go ahead and play around with it. Now there are a lot of solutions about how to deploy a cluster locally on your computer using Kind, Minikube, or any other open source projects, but I believe that using a cloud provider like Linode will give you a better experience and a better performance when you want to have a perfect environment for just playing around with it hands-on. So it's going to be a very exciting video. We are about to see how to deploy a cluster in a few minutes, and we will also deploy a nice dashboard so it will be a good visualization about each of the objects that you want to go ahead and deploy on your cluster. Let's get started. So the first step is to create a new Linode account if you do not have one. Now I won't walk through how to create an account since it is as easy as any registration website. So just visit the link in the description to receive $20 free credit on Linode and then go ahead and create your account. So I will go now to that tab, which is already after I logged in to my personal account, and I will show you how to create the Kubernetes cluster here. Now you can see that my dashboard is not empty like yours if you just logged in, because I already have some nodes going on here, but I will just show how to create from scratch a Kubernetes cluster. So in the navigation bar, you should be seeing this option of Kubernetes, and once you click here, then you should see this following page. And again, you should not see any cluster for yourself because you never created one, but for myself I already have one cluster that is going on. So from here you should go ahead and create a cluster, and then you can go ahead and select some options here. So the first option is the cluster label, which will represent kind of a unique string that is going to just represent your cluster. So you can go ahead and call this whatever you like. I will call this cluster -1, and then you want to go ahead and select your region. Now it is a great idea to select United States if you live on states, or just choose the country that you know that it is closest to your location, because I believe that it will improve the performance once you try to communicate with cluster. So I will select London for here, and the Kubernetes version should be the latest as you can. If by the time you watch this video and it is something like 1.3, just go ahead and select that. And now you'll see that there are a lot of node options that you can go ahead and select here. Now you want to make sure that you select the option that it is cheapest for now. And the reason for that, it is because you probably don't want to waste too much from your free credits or money if you just want to play around with Kubernetes. So it might be a great idea to start with a very minimalistic plan. Okay, so from here, try to go ahead to that shared CPU navigation option here, and you should be seeing this first option, which is going to be a great start for playing around with a cluster. Now by default, Kubernetes recommends to at least create a cluster with 3 virtual machines. And again, we don't look for a high performance cluster for that stage, because we are just trying to set up an environment to play around with Kubernetes, to get more familiar with it. So that's why we can go ahead and decrease this amount to 1 and then add this to our plan. Now as soon as you do that, then you should be seeing the cluster summary here on the right top, and you can see that it is going to cost only $10 a month, which is great. And now you should go ahead and say that you agree to Linode privacy policy, and then you should be good to go to just create your cluster. Now once you will click on here, then the next page should be the page that will represent all the clusters that you have, and you should be seeing your cluster being prepared. So let's give it a minute or two to see what will happen here. Okay, so to be honest, in the first click I received an internal server error, But now that I try to click the second time, then it worked for me. So I'm showing you this because this is something that might happen to you as well, but you want to make sure that you click again if you receive an error. So it was probably a temporary issue for myself, but let's continue from here. Alright, so now that we have this, then you can see that we have a status on our node pools. And you can see that we only have a cluster with one node and it is provisioning. So it means that our one node cluster is being prepared here, so we should give it a couple of minutes in order to continue on to the next step to see how we can connect to that. Alright, so we can see that our cluster is running and it means that it is ready to use. Now the next thing that we want to do now is to download some command line tools that will allow us to communicate with that cluster. And this is a command line utility that is called kubectl or kubectl. Now if you use any kind of Linux distribution, then it could be installed with your package manager. Just go ahead and say yum install kubectl, for example. But on Windows it could be a little bit more trickier, so I'm going to show how it could be done in the easiest way that is possible. Now in order to install tools like kubectl, then I really recommend using this package manager on Windows, which is called Chocolatey. Chocolatey is an easy software that you can download to your Windows, and you can just install other software by only typing in one command. So let's go ahead and see how we can get started with this one. So if you will follow this link, which you can find again from my description, then you will see that we have a documentation how to install this Chocolatey in our computer. Now I'm going to zoom in a bit, but you can see that we have this long command that we can go ahead and copy it. Now I will press on copy, and then I will go ahead and open my terminal as an administrator, and I'm going to show how it could be installed. So let's bring in our terminal here as an administrator and just go inside PowerShell, press on enter, and then paste the command that we have just copied. Now this long PowerShell command is what is going to be responsible to install the Chocolatey to your computer. Okay, so the result is actually good because it says that Choco is already found on my computer, but if you don't have this, then you will receive a different output. Then you can go ahead and just refresh your environment variables now with refresh env, and then try to see if Choco is really installed by typing choco -- version, and you can see that we receive something back, so it means that we have done a great job. And now I can allow myself to get out from the PowerShell. Let's type in exit, and then let's clean everything. And then now we can install this kubectl that I was talking about a minute ago. And it will be by saying choco install kubernetes-cli. And now if you press on enter, then you should see the installation going on here, and this is good. This means that we have done a great job downloading the Kubernetes CLI. Only we need to approve this one by typing in A, and then we should be good to go. Now one quick side note here, you really want to pay attention that your Kubernetes CLI is equal in its version. If you will run some advanced Kubernetes commands, then you could have trouble in the future. If you remember, I chose the version of 1.22 in the cluster that I installed. So the Kubernetes and the kubectl should be matched in their versions, but since we are not going to run too much complex commands, then I believe that we should be good in that stage. But take this as a note, as a best practice to implement. Okay, so I cleaned my screen here again. Now we can say again refresh env to refresh the environment variables. Now if we want to verify that we have done a great job, then we can just say kubectl in our terminal and press on enter, and the fact that we receive some output means that we have done a great job installing this. And let's go ahead and see now how we can communicate with our cluster with this kubectl. Now communicating to our cluster is going to be pretty easy because we need to download a file that specifically represents this cluster that we have just created, which is called kubeconfig. Kubeconfig includes metadata about your cluster, also some secrets that are very important to maintain securely. So we need to bring in this information from Linode, and we need to paste this in a very specific file, which I'm going to talk about it just right now. So by default, the kubectl command line tool looks for a specific location where it should find its clusters that it's supposed to connect to them. Now, the default location is inside your user profile, which is the exact directory that I'm in right now, and it searches for kubeconfig files in a directory that is called .kube. So we should be creating this directory, and be sure to name it just as I do here, .cube, and go now to this directory, and now we should be pasting here a file that is called config, and this config should include the kubeconfig that we're about to download from Linode console. So if we will bring our Linode console here, then you can see that we have this view option to kubeconfig. So I can just click on here, and then I can click on this button, which will copy this entire section, which is just a simple YAML file, by the way. And once I have copied this, then I can go back to my terminal and I can do something like this. So I will just open my file explorer in this directory, and once I have done that, then I can go ahead and create a simple text file. I can open that and paste this in, save this and close back, and then name this file config without any extension, just the way it is. And once I press on enter, then I'm just going to confirm it, and we should be good to go. Now this action here is called configuring the kubectl context. Okay, so this is an important thing that you must do correctly, otherwise your kubectl is going to bring in a lot of trouble. So once we have set this up, then now our kubectl command line tool should be aware about which cluster it needs to communicate with. So if we go ahead and clean everything and say something like kubectl cluster-info, let's see the results. Okay, so we actually see that we receive some output. So this means that it found the cluster that it should be communicating with. So it means that we have done a perfect job, and let's continue from here. Now, when you are just getting started with Kubernetes, then it is important that you will see some things visually. And for this purpose, I believe that if you will install a dashboard that will display everything visually for your cluster, then it will be easier for you to understand the differences between different kinds of objects. So in order to do that, then I'm going to bring in this URL here, which will show us how we can install a nice visual dashboard to our cluster, so we can manage our cluster from there with a nice user interface. So you can see that I'm inside the official project of Kubernetes dashboard and then /releases. Now if you scroll down a bit, then you are going to see this command section that you can just copy and paste to your terminal, and you can see that it is just a kubectl command. Now the apply subcommand is the command that is used in order to deploy different kinds of objects. So you can see that it just used a link that used to be a long YAML file, which again, YAML file is the known convention to just write the kinds of objects that you want to deploy, and this link is just that, okay? It is a long section of YAML that you can see that the collection of it will bring you a nice dashboard. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go to my terminal, and I'm just going to paste this in and press enter. So it is going to take a minute until it installs all the objects, and once this has been completed, then we are going to see how we are going to access to the dashboard. Alright, so now the dashboard is installed on our cluster, but how we are going to access it? So there is in each Kubernetes cluster an API server that is hosted. Now, this is not taking for granted that you can access it just the way it is, and there needs to be some kind of bridge between your local host to the API server that is right now hosted on your cluster. So the way that we can access it is by enabling the proxy that kubectl command gives us. So it is going to be as easy by saying here kubectl proxy. And once we executed this, then you can see that we see starting to serve on our localhost IP and then this 8001 port here. Now you want to make sure that this port is not busy by some other testing web server that you execute on your machine. This is just a quick side note about that one. And now that our proxy server is running, then we can go ahead and just open up a new tab and paste this one more link that you can get from the description, which is going to be just a link that will allow you to communicate with the cluster that we have just deployed. We are going to press enter here, and you can see that we are about to access our dashboard. If this is the page that you see, then it means that you have done a great job. Now you have two ways in order to authenticate to the dashboard, and the preferred way here is going to be by the kubeconfig that we already have. You can go ahead and just click on those three dots to browse and just point out your config file, which is just what I'm about to do here. So I'm going to say config and open it and then use sign in. Alright, so you can see that now we are inside the Kubernetes dashboard, and again, this is very useful once you are trying to get familiar with all the kinds of objects, namespaces, pods, services, config maps, and so on. Seeing all the objects that you deploy visually in here is going to be a wonderful step for yourself in order to get more comfortable with Kubernetes. Okay, so this will close out our video. Let me know if you enjoyed this and if you expect for more Kubernetes content on this channel. And that's it. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and consider subscribing to my channel so you will never miss any upload, and see you next time.